Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Our speaker today is Dharma Daddy, a.k.a. Roger Corless. In another life, he was a professor of theology, or is it theology that way at Duke University?
Well, I was just professor of religion.
Oh, he was just professor?
Yes, they didn't do theology. That was in the other department. We didn't know what we meant. We didn't know what we believed. That was the other department. Where they believed in Jesus.
Well, anyway, he's here for possible clarification of why we're here. And we welcome you, Roger.
Thank you. I will try to talk for not more than half an hour and then give some time for questions. But if you're getting lost and you want some clarification, please raise your hand and ask, because there's no point in my going on if it's not making any sense to you, though I think that this talk will be fairly straightforward. It may be a bit unusual, a different form of Buddhism than you're used to, but I think it's not too difficult to understand. But if it is, if you're getting lost anywhere, because I'm so accustomed to using technical terms in Buddhism, I don't realize sometimes that they are technical terms, and then people get lost. So in the commentary on the large sutra on the perfection of wisdom, Nagarjuna says that the Buddha recognized that there were 84,000 different spiritual maladies to which humans are subject, and the Buddha has the understanding of each malady and the way to cure it. So when we take the Buddha and see him as a physician more than as a teacher of religion, we can understand why there can be very often different teachings which are often so different that they are either opposite or irrelevant. So, for instance, you could say there were three kinds of diseases. We could reduce them to three: constipation, diarrhea, and abrasion. Those are three very different problems. And there would be three remedies: laxative, kaopectate, and Band-Aid. Now, if you use the wrong one, you either make the situation worse or you do nothing at all. For instance, if you having a diarrhea and use laxative, it gets worse. If you use a Band-Aid, it probably will not have much effect. But if you use the proper medicine for the complaint, it should be effective. And this is why we have different teachings in Buddhism. One other way to put it, which is not quite so picturesque, is if you see the teaching as a path, and the idea is to walk straight down the path or gaily forwards down the path towards enlightenment or liberation, then there will be some of us who wander off to the left and we get the teaching moved to the right, and others who wander off to the right and we get the teaching moved to the left. So we should not expect the Buddhist teachings to come together as a coherent conceptual whole, but they come together as different remedies for people with different problems or starting points. For some reason, the most popular form of Buddhist teachings for people who are what we basically call Western. It's an odd kind of term, really, because Westerners extend all the way to the east coast of Russia, I think, which is not very west, and but they don't go into Africa. You see, if you're in Morocco, you're not a Westerner, although Morocco is west of Rome. So it's an odd kind of term, but I think we know what it basically means white, Caucasian, to put it quite frankly. And in the US, we have basically two forms of Buddhism. One which I call the ethnic form, which comes in with the immigrants and tends to form cultural centers around something like the Thai temple in Oakland or the Chinese temples in Chinatown. And then we have the what is called often the elite Buddhism or convert Buddhism, which is attractive basically to white, intelligent, upwardly mobile, middle class people. It hasn't changed much from that since it started. And these people, for some reason, like to sit and not have much ritual and not make any noise and, of course, take their shoes off and concentrate on the breath or on nothing or on something they might have heard about Zen. And it's the concentration is on a formless kind of meditation, which is very fruitful for a lot of people, and it's often the only thing that people can do if they have been frightened by ritual. Quite a number of us, I think, were brought up in a situation where Christianity was the tradition of the home, and anything that reminds us of that is a problem. I've found that people brought up in Judaism don't seem to have that kind of problem. Maybe because Judaism is at least as much about what you eat as to what you do in some kind of formal situation. So it doesn't look so religious, you see, more of a cultural thing. Would it be okay to have a cheeseburger, or shall I just stick with the hamburger? And especially on the Day of Atonement, you know, that's the big issue, not do you believe and do you do the rituals. But there are some people who practice the Zen and the insight meditation, and they do find that it's a little bit like drinking distilled water. And I find that too. It's a very pure form of Buddhism, but it's not appropriate for everyone, and it certainly isn't appropriate for me. When I was a visitor to the Bay Area rather than a resident here, I'm only minimally a resident here, because where I live in Benicia is, people say, where is Benicia? And I say, well, it's a secret. And because you can't find it. You see the signs to it. But then you've missed it. You've gone through and you haven't seen it. And it's on the extreme edge of the Bay Area, or it's on the western edge of the Delta region. Really, it's as much the Delta region. But anyhow, I live somewhere around here, and it's almost on the BART line, so I guess that makes it Bay Area. But when I was visiting, I'd stay at the Zen Center, and I would stay there because it was cheaper than a hotel, though more expensive than a friend's apartment. But most friends in the city have an apartment that is large enough for themselves and perhaps half of a cat, and that's about it. So they really can't take a visitor for more than a day or two. So I stay at Zen Center, and I'd say, well, I'm staying at Zen Center, but I'm only a guest, because I won't be in the Zendo because I don't like Zen. And then I would give a talk on how I didn't like Zen, and they'd love it. They loved it. There's something about being Zen that anyhow, what I prefer is what I call a heart-centered approach to the Buddhist tradition. It's called the Pure Land tradition, and that is a very accurate translation of the Chinese term for it, Jingtu, the Pure Land, though it might actually be the purifying land. There's some controversy as to how that relates to the Sanskrit. But it's not a very helpful term. I did my dissertation on Pure Land Buddhism, and it tends not to come up if you do a keyword search for Buddhism. It tends to come up under geology or ecology. So it has to be explained a bit. It is the most popular form of Buddhist practice in East Asia by far. I mean, it's just so much more popular than any other tradition, including Zen, that it's no contest as to how popular it is with ordinary people in East Asia or part of Southeast Asia going down to Vietnam. It is the most common form in China, Korea, Japan, Okinawa, Vietnam. That's about it, I think. Yes, you don't find it in Theravada, except as far as it interacts with Theravada in Vietnam. And it's the least well known in the US, because if I would say that I was a student of Zen, people would nod their heads as if they knew what I meant. They might not know what I meant, but they've heard the word. And I say Pure Land. I could say Shin, but that's a version of the Pure Land Buddhist tradition which is found only in Japan, and it has rather specific features which make it untypical, as actually, to be quite frank, most of the forms of Buddhism in Japan are untypical. Since the Kamakura period, Japanese Buddhism has taken on a sectarian character and has divided itself up into an ever-increasingly large number of denominations which look superficially like a Christian model, although the division is not on the basis of doctrine but on the basis of lineage or family or tradition. But that means that if you're doing Zen, you're not doing Shin, which is Pure Land, and if you're doing Rinzai Zen, you're not doing Soto Zen, and everybody is very much boxed in to their particular way of doing things, and that is quite untypical of Buddhism as a whole, which is largely this big medicine chest of different things that you can do and give to different people at different times. And it is also quite different from what happens in the rest of East Asia, where people will pick from a number of different traditions and find which one is more suitable for them. Then you will find that if you really ask them, and people sometimes don't ask this question, that when an East Asian teacher is going to give teachings that he or she really thinks would be helpful to most people, they say, really, don't bother with Zen, it's too difficult. One teacher I just read about, I'm reading the book on hermits in China, somebody who calls himself Red Pine in his other translations has been going around China in the most extraordinary conditions. It's just lovely to read about these people in the freezing and the slipping snow and the mud as I'm in bed, reading. I like that's the best way I like to go on pilgrimages. He came across one person who said, Zen or Chan is too difficult to do today. You must have good roots, what are called kushala mula. That's to say, you must be prepared by incarnations beforehand. Otherwise, you'll just sit and won't get anywhere. You can sit for your whole life and you won't get enlightened, you won't get anywhere, it'll just be hopeless. But if you recite the name of the Buddha, as I do, then you will make progress. Vietnamese very typically will say this. Vietnamese teachers will very typically say, it's good to do Tien, as they call it, but it's far better to recite the name of the Buddha. So what is this reciting the name of the Buddha? It's normally taught with stories. The sutras, which specifically represent it, and there are normally said to be 3, but actually there's a couple of dozen, or more than that, which have some significant mention of this practice. They're normally said to be 3 sutras, and they are stories told by Buddha Shakyamuni. The Buddha, as we say, the historical Buddha, or I would prefer to say the Buddha for our continuum. In the Buddhist universe, there are many dimensions and many different kinds of universes and continua. We happen to be more or less locked in to one particular one, and we have difficulty moving out of it, and we call that history and space and time. And then since we can't find some of the other Buddhas in history, we say they're mythological, which means that you only believe in them if you don't believe in them if you are a professor. You'd only believe in them if you are a peasant. A peasant, of course, as you know, is a farmer who doesn't speak English. There are no peasants in the English-speaking world. They're farmers. All the peasants are in Mexico, France, places like that. But they're farmers, really. But that's a lot of people. I mean, most people say, I don't have time to do Zen. I mean, when I sit, my mind is a mess. I can't concentrate on anything. So the recommendation is that you simply recite the name of a particular Buddha who's called Amitabha or Amitayus. Footnote, in the Tibetan tradition, Amitabha and Amitayus are different. I don't know why. I've asked people why, and I've not got a good answer, except from the Tibetans who say, oh, well, of course, we have the true teaching, and that's something from the Chinese, so that's why they're wrong. And I think there's another answer there, but I'm not sure what it is yet. Or just in the brief form, the root form is Amita, A-M-I-T-A. So Amita Buddhism might be the best way to describe it, because it's focusing on the Buddha Amita, and the Pure Land is something I'll get to in a moment. That's sort of a consequence of all of this. The word Amita means unmeasurable or immeasurable. In fact, if you know English, you already know the word, though you don't realize it. The root me is the same root that is an English word to measure, or the English word is the French word meter. So meter, A-M-I-T, means immeasurable. And put very simply, I would say, the Buddha Amita is the personal face of the Buddha nature or of the Buddha mind. When we speak of Buddhism in the West, very often we talk of enlightenment. And the idea is to be enlightened. And then you've got this wisdom, this knowledge of everything. And that sounds very nice, but it doesn't sound very cozy. I mean, it doesn't sound it sounds like you're there all by yourself and you know everything and you're somehow isolated. They don't mean to say that, but that's how it seems. And I personally feel that insight meditation and the kind of Zen meditation which is normally taught in the West, rather unintentionally, I don't believe it intends to do this, but unintentionally, it tends to overemphasize the wisdom aspect of the Buddha mind. And the Buddha mind is equally, we are taught in all traditions, the Buddha mind is equally balanced between wisdom and compassion. I would also say equally with energy, or there's as wisdom and compassion, and then energy is driving the whole thing. The energy part comes from the Tantra or Vajrayana, and it's not spoken of much in the Sutra tradition, but it certainly is there as far as I can tell, because without energy, I remember asking a Tibetan teacher once, saying, well, we've taken these vows of being bodhisattvas, and we've taken a vow that we're going to liberate all sentient beings until we're enlightened. That's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of mosquitoes out there, and apart from humans, and it's exhausting. What do I do about that? And he says, well, it may seem exhausting now, but when you advance and purify your mind more, it won't be as exhausting. And I think what he was saying is that when you get up to a certain level, you get a kind of energy. You get in touch with the energy of the true nature of mind. The Buddha nature, the Buddha mind, the Dharmakaya, the Tathagata Garpa, that's to say the womb or mesh of the Buddha, they're all more or less the same terms. If I was going to give a precise academic lecture, I want to distinguish all these, but for practical purposes, all of these terms are the same thing. So the true nature of mind, which is our minds, the true nature of mind is perfectly wise, perfectly compassionate, and infinitely energetic. And insofar as we do not feel perfectly wise, perfectly compassionate, and infinitely energized, can we tell that we are not yet at the goal? We have not yet reached to the goal. So when we talk of compassion, I don't think we can talk of it without a face. I don't think I can say compassion in general. One experiences compassion, which is just a long word for love. I have to use something like compassion because the English word love is so confusing. If somebody says to you, I love you, you must ask them immediately, what do you mean? Because you can love chocolates, you can love dogs, you can love the deity if you're a Christian, a Jew, or a Muslim. You can love a partner in a sexual way. You can love a parent or a child in a different kind of way, presumably not a sexual way. And it's all called love. And then we have this, we finish off a conversation saying, okay, love you too, you see. And what does it all mean? I mean, it's, compassion is feeling the sorrow of another as if it were your own, and it goes with the other term, mudita, which is empathetic joy, feeling the joy of another as one's own. I think they're two halves of the same thing. So I cannot myself think of compassion or love without an individual there, a person there. And so we're introduced to the Buddha Amita as a person. And the Buddha Amita, according to the story, began as a human being, and he met another Buddha many years ago. So if we took it in our historical time, then, as my teacher at University of Wisconsin would say, the former Buddha must have been a dinosaur. But if we put it into mythological terms, which is, say, another dimension, then we get into the Star Wars thing where it starts off. Doesn't it start off with episode 4 or something? I don't know. I got mixed up with that. A long time ago in a galaxy far away, and then something happened which seemed to be in the future. So I think we can say that in some kind of a dimension, and I would have to talk much longer to say what I mean by that, but there is some kind of dimension of our experience in which it is more accurate to say a long time ago than to say it was just invented. That there's something very deep and profound, very interior or archetypal or something. And at this point, the person begins to practice and vows that when he becomes a Buddha, he will have a land or an environment or kingdom, if you like, which will be without any difficulties and will have all of the delights of all of the senses, but also will be a place where one can go on to final enlightenment. And then, of course, the Buddha is speaking this, and then they say to the Buddha Shakyamuni, well, so did he make it? And he says, yes, he made it many hundreds of thousands of years ago, and now he is called the Buddha Amita, living in the Pure Land, or Sukhavati, also called the extremely happy land, the land of Sukha. Sukha, S-U-K-H-A, is the opposite in Buddhist teaching of dukkha, D-U-H-K-H-A. Dukkha is the first noble truth, the realization that everything in our world, even if it's nice, eventually turns bad. Whatever we get, it eventually goes stale or sour or bad. And so the end of everything is that it's really, it's not worth putting it's not worth putting too much energy into it, because it won't give us final happiness. We have to look elsewhere for the final happiness. And then Sukha is the opposite of that. It is unconditioned bliss that never decays. We don't experience this very often, but it takes the Vajrayana or the Tantra to tell us where it happens. Sometimes people say, well, in Zen you'll have a moment of enlightenment, and you'll get it. Well, yes, that's very nice. But it's much more, it hits home much better to say the moment of orgasm. And I'm sure that in a company like this we've all experienced at least one. The moment of orgasm is a moment of total clarity. The world seems to stop, or all moments are in that moment, and there's no feeling of subject and object, and yet there's no kind of merging with everything. We don't become one with everything, as the hot dog vendor joke says, which is a more Hindu thing. We're suddenly there's great openness and bliss, which has no bits and pieces. It has no parts, so it doesn't decay. And one way of understanding the moment of orgasm, and why I'm sure many of us spend a lot of time pursuing that, is that it is an effective way of allowing the pure nature of our minds to surface. We can do it without orgasm, actually. That is one of the teachings of the Buddhist tradition. But orgasm will help it. Is that, where did that come from? It didn't come from the other person, and it was just these nerves and stuff firing off, but something happened, and it was everything else sort of dropped away, and the pure nature of mind arose. And the problem, of course, with having an orgasm is that then it goes away, and then you smoke a cigarette, or you find that you're next to somebody that you really would prefer now that you were not, and there's all kinds of problems develop. So that's not enlightenment. So. The pure nature of mind then has a face of compassion. It is nurturing. It is not only the knowledge, but it is nurturing, and it nurtures all of us. So the description of the Pure Land, where Buddha Amita lives, is that it is full of all kinds of delights, with all of the senses. It goes on at great length, with all the music and the rippling streams and the palaces and everything going about. And I have to say also that it's very specific that everybody is a male. Even if you happen to be reborn as a female in this life, you'll be fortunate enough to be reborn as a male when you get there. So it's really a gay paradise, right? I mean, it really is. That's where there's none of these women to have to concern ourselves with. It's all men, and high bodhisattvas and all men. And it says all the senses are blended, all the five senses are blended. So you can feel the colors, you can taste the sounds and everything else. But usually these kinds of things make us want more and more and more, and then as we get more and more and more, we find we get less and less satisfaction from them, because we're trying to get it out of this reality of samsara, and that's what addiction comes from, where we're trying to get total happiness out of something that's going to decay, and we'll be left with the mess. The happiness of the Pure Land is unalloyed, and it's the more we have, the more we get. It is unconditioned. It is without end. It is infinite, and so we can just get as much happiness as we want. And there's always more to have from that, and it leads us on to becoming liberated from all of our restrictions and passions and all of our difficulties. And in some traditions of the Pure Land, it says this gives us the being reborn in the Pure Land after death gives us the conditions where we can go on to nirvana after that. Some other traditions say being reborn in the Pure Land after death is something that is itself liberation to nirvana, And then some other, which I find more interesting, say, we can see the Pure Land right here. In Japan, this was somewhat of a heresy, because it seemed to be that if people thought this, they weren't going to kowtow to the emperor as much, and emperors that don't get to be bowed to get a bit annoyed, because you see, well, I'm the emperor, you're supposed to bow to me, right? That's what I'm the emperor for. Why others to be emperor? But people say, no, we're in the Pure Land. We don't need to have any emperor over us. And there is a movement now, especially through the Shilai Buddhist monastery, which was established in Los Angeles County, in Hacienda Heights, as a mission monastery from Taiwan, for Guangshan, monastery of the light of the Buddha, in which the abbot is saying, what we need to do is build the Pure Land on earth, to bring about, to work for the happiness of people on earth, and to bring about the Pure Land here, and then also to see the Pure Land on earth. There is a sutra called The Teaching of Vimalakirti, which I might talk about some other time, because it's a very funny sutra. It's got lots of jokes in it. Therefore, the Zen people like it. And the Buddha is next. Buddha Shakyamuni is next to his disciple, and he says, "Don't you see the glory of all the Buddha lands and all of the richness of the world?" And the disciple says, "No, just like the ordinary world to me." And the Buddha taps his foot, and poof, everything changes, and he sees it all sparkling, just like he was on acid or something tremendous. Just wow, whoa, gosh! And he sees all of the Buddhas preaching the Dharma on all of the planets and universes, and then Buddha taps his foot again, and it goes back to normal. So this indicates that we don't see the Pure Land because we've blocked ourselves off from that. And the simple practice, which I will leave you with, is that you simply recite the name of the Buddha Amita. It was begun in the Sanskrit, and the Sanskrit form would be Namo Amita Buddha, Namo. Namo is a form of the Sanskrit word meaning to give honor to. And then Amita, the word Amita, unmeasured one, unmeasured wisdom and compassion, and then Buddha. It comes out in the Chinese as Namo Amitofo, and the Koreans will say Namamita Bul, the Japanese will say Namamita Butsu, and the Vietnamese, I believe, I don't know much about somebody, a Vietnamese once pronounced it to me something like Namo Aziza Pat. But it's the same thing. And all you need to do is recite this. It would be another lecture, a talk, which would take quite some time to explain, to go into how the teachers explain that this will work. But the simplest way is to say, if the word Amita is the personal face of the Buddha nature, then by saying the word Amita, you are drawing down the essence of the Buddha nature into you, or you can picture it as that, as coming into you, although actually what you're doing is also stimulating it in yourself, or it's going both ways at once, and your mind is not wandering off. It's concentrating on the Buddha nature by saying Namo Amita Buddha, Namo Amita Butsu, Namo Amita Tofo. And whether the stories of the sutras are right or not, people over the centuries have found that when they recite this name, and you can recite it standing at the bus stop, whenever you are, you don't have to be specially in a meditation hall, something works. And over time you find that you have developed. All right, there's a few minutes left, I think, for questions.
I want to ask you to take questions afterwards, because you say 5 minutes for announcements and for the closing. Is that okay, Roger?
We have 7 minutes by my watch, but anyhow, but you're the person in charge.
This is a short question.
question about a certain practice, which is I've never quite understood, from what you say, and I can see why. I love listening to groups of people chanting and to chant. I'm not as good at chanting all by myself
Yes.
as I am when I'm surrounded by the sounds of other people chanting with me.
Yes.
There's something
Yes.
oceanic about that interests
Yes.
my spirit. And do you have any commentary? I mean, I've always felt inadequate because of that. But
It is this is something you can do on your own, but also it's done in common. And I was going to bring it with me, but it didn't make it into my backpack. I have a little thing that looks like a little Walkman, come from China, and it's got all it does. It's got a little chip inside, and it has a recording of the chanting in the monastery. Namo Amitofo, and it keeps on going. So, and you can plug it into your ear, and then you can. The idea is that the words of the Buddha, and especially the name of the Buddha, is itself enlightening. It does its work on its own just by listening to it. So just being awash in all of this, it will do it. We realize that when we listen to music, it does something. I mean, that's why people listen to different kinds of music all the time, the thumpy music or the peaceful music or whatever. And what a mantra is a kind of music. A mantra is, and this reciting of the name of the Buddha is a mantra more than it is anything else. It's not legitimate to translate a mantra into English because it's never grammatical anyhow. I don't have any mantra which is good Sanskrit. It's all bad Sanskrit. But the music of it is what does the trick. And so when you Namamita Buddha, Namamita Buddha, Namamita Buddha, Namamita Buddha, eventually it will have its effect. Okay, thank you. So we have denouncements now?
We have denouncements. Any denouncements or announcements? This is the time. July, the first Sunday in July is the next scheduled steering committee meeting, but because that's on July 4th weekend, I don't think that's a good time. So it'll be the second weekend. And at that time, we'll consider if we want to do another all-sangha ritual like we did last September. So anyone, whether you're on the steering committee or not, if you have some ideas, bring them forth to me, or who else is on the steering committee?
Well, yeah, and also I planned last year's, so if anyone wants to do this year, I'd like to help out. I'm not sure I'm going to be around, but I'd like to see if there's energy for it. It's quite a nice thing to do. So see me if you want to contact.
Remind us what it was last year so that people will. Actually, I wasn't here.
Oh, well, it was just sort of make a ceremony. Like a make a circus, but we had an altar and had some people who talked about the Four Noble Truths, and then we shared with a talking stick. It was kind of New Age in some ways, but it was legitimate Buddhist ritual of one of a kind.
Right. So if anyone has any ideas about a ritual that we could do as a sangha, really intended to bring us together as a sangha, so that it isn't always teacher, everybody else. So it's more of a collective experience.
That's right. That's what it is.
Okay, and Francis, you want to give some host announcements? Francis is our host.
To the new people, welcome. And if you have questions, be very relaxed in asking the facilitator or myself. We don't know the answers, we'll find them for you. There is tea and some cookies. Please be kind and wash your cups before you leave, and remember to put some money in the bottle.
you have a blessing that you could lead us in our final circle, or would you
Yes.
like us to just say the...
No,
Can I ask one more question?
Yes, sure.
A couple of weeks ago, we had a speaker on the Nichiren Nam-myoho Renge.
Yes.
And a few of us were talking afterwards about, geez, why is this so hard for us to comprehend as being effective, or what, as if we had been implanted a taboo to believe that chanting or the repetition of something would work. Do you know, in your understanding of, the West or the Western spiritual traditions, what that little taboo is? Do you know what I mean?
It's not in the West. It isn't a taboo in the Western spiritual tradition because, for instance, before I came here, I stopped off at Mass in Benicia, and after the early Mass on a Sunday, they do the Rosary. They recite the Rosary, and then in the Eastern Orthodox tradition called hesychasm, they recite a prayer which is in English something like, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have pity on me, a sinner. And that's called the Jesus prayer, so that you're getting in contact with Jesus by saying that. In the Muslim tradition, they recite the name of Allah in what they call dhikr. So it is already a part of the Western tradition, because I regard Islam as Western. It's as Western as anything else as far as I can see. Christianity and Judaism. And Judaism, you'll have a certain amount of reciting of this kind of thing too. It is a blockage on the part of some practitioners, I think, who for some reason feel that you're not doing religion unless you're doing formless meditation. That's the best I can say about that. And the way that I try to get around that is to say, think of music. It's the music of the Dharma, and it transforms you by listening to it. In fact, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, so-called, it shouldn't be called the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It's a book, and it's in Tibetan, that's for sure. But it should be called the Great Book of Liberation by Hearing, that liberates just by being heard in the intermediate state. So just by listening to that, you get liberated. All right? So do we step back? Yeah, we stand up, don't we? If I can. Oh. Standing up is more difficult. All right. May all beings be separated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings be joined to happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings live in equanimity with those who are near and those who are far. May all beings find peace, freedom, and happiness. Namamita Buddha, Namamita Buddha, Namamita Buddha. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.